So today, we're going to dig into a really powerful analysis of Iran. We're going to look past the headlines, the ones that talk about quiet streets, and try to understand a system that's being described as being right on the brink of a massive, historic shift.
All right, let's start with a number that's, well, it's just staggering. According to a UN rapporteur that our source material cites, the crackdown on recent protests may have led to over 20,000 deaths. And this isn't just some abstract statistic. It's really the foundation for understanding everything else about the regime's current situation.
And that right there is the central paradox of this whole situation. The analysis we're looking at argues that the quiet you see on Iran's streets right now is super misleading. It's not peace. It's not people giving up. No, it's this tense, fragile silence that's hiding a really deep and volatile crisis.
So, the big question is, how did we get to this point? Well, the first piece of the puzzle is that the regime's main survival strategy has been boiled down to its most basic, most primitive element, just brute force.
And what's just wild, and frankly horrifying, is how bluntly our source material puts it. This isn't about some subtle game of control. It's about using overwhelming, terrifying violence to create fear and literally beat society into submission.
And get this. The analysis points to this incredibly cruel detail to really drive the point home. Grieving families are actually being charged what are called bullet fees just to get the bodies of their loved ones back. I mean, it shows you a system where even death becomes a transaction, and cruelty is a calculated strategy to keep up this fragile illusion of being in control.
Okay, so you have this brutal face the regime shows the world, but underneath, the whole thing is apparently rotting from the inside out. Which brings us to the next part of this analysis, what they call the hollow state.
Which, leads to the big question the source is asking here. If the only tool you have left in your toolbox is violence, what does that really say about the foundations of your state, about your economy, your leadership?
The picture this paints of the economy is, well, it's a total house of cards. Here's how it works. Regime insiders basically invent wealth. They inflate property values to get these huge loans, and then, when it's time to pay up, they just dump the now worthless assets back onto the banks. What you end up with is an economy that has no real foundation, just built on a cycle of corruption and bad debt.
So if the economy is basically a sham, you've got to ask, who's in charge of this mess? Let's take a look at the political structure, because this is where it gets really interesting.
And the analysis uses this one really powerful word to describe Iran's political system: kakistocracy. It's not a word you hear every day, but it literally means rule by the worst, the least qualified, the most incompetent people.
And you can see the results of this pretty clearly. For decades, if you were competent, you were a threat. You were pushed out. All that mattered was absolute loyalty. This has left the weakest, least capable people in charge right when the country is at a critical moment. The regime can't even deliver on its one last claim, to provide security, which means, in the eyes of most Iranians, it has zero legitimacy left.
Okay, so a lot of people try to compare this situation to 1979 and the fall of the Shah. But according to this analysis, that's a huge mistake, and the differences are absolutely critical if you want to understand what's happening today.
Let's actually break that down, because the differences are everything. Back then, the Shah was ruling a state that, for all its faults, was functional and recognized by the world. And in the end, he had a way out. He could go into exile. The current regime? It's seen as hollow, illegitimate, and a pariah on the world stage. And most importantly, its leaders have absolutely nowhere to go.
And that's the absolute key. Unlike the Shah, today's leaders have so much blood on their hands that backing down just isn't an option. For them, it's become a zero-sum game of survival. It's a kill-or-be-killed mentality. They're trapped in a dead end of their own making.
So that brings us to the future. Or maybe the present. With the supreme leader getting older, the analysis suggests Iran has sort of already entered a post-Khamenei era, and it's a period that's defined by this huge, dangerous cloud of uncertainty.
The thinking is, he has to go for any real change to happen. The source argues his entire mindset is so rigid, he sees any compromise, any flexibility as total collapse, that he's the single biggest roadblock. But, and this is a big but, him being gone doesn't automatically mean things get better.
What comes next? Well, that could be an incredibly dangerous free-for-all. As you can see here, the risks are huge. A massive power vacuum that different factions or military leaders will try to fill. The very real possibility that opposition groups outside the country can't get it together, and, of course, the chance that other countries will try to interfere.
And when it comes to other countries stepping in, the analysis is pretty blunt about their priorities. They're not necessarily focused on creating a perfect democracy in Iran.
As this chart shows, their biggest concerns by far are regional stability and making sure the nuclear program is contained. That could easily lead them to back another strongman just to avoid total chaos.
Okay, so if the solution isn't going to come from the outside, and the inside is this tinderbox, where does that leave us? Where does the source say the real hope for change actually lies? First things first, the analysis makes one thing crystal clear. The bravery of the Iranian people in recent years has been just extraordinary. That courage is the starting point for everything.
But, and this is the really tough part, the analysis argues that courage, on its own, just isn't enough. It's absolutely essential, for sure, but it has to be connected to a strategy, to organization, and to a clear idea of what comes next.
And that really brings us to the heart of the whole argument. Real, lasting change isn't going to be dropped in from another country or led by any single group. It has to grow from within Iran itself, from its social movements, its institutions, and the political will of its own people.
Which leaves us with this final, really challenging question that the analysis puts on the table. If the people have already shown they have more than enough courage, what is that missing piece? What's the strategy and the organization needed to turn all that incredible bravery into a stable democratic future, and avoid the trap of just swapping one dictator for another?